The struggling widower found himself staring at two small figures, huddled against his gate as dawn broke over his failing ranch. Behind him, 3 men with ledgers and hard faces waited for answers he didn't have. Zeke Thornfield's breath came out in white puffs. The morning air cut through his worn jacket like judgment. His cattle stood motionless in the distance, ribs showing through patchy coats. The crops he'd planted last spring had withered to nothing. Thornfield. The banker's voice carried the weight of finality. 3 months overdue. We need payment today, or we take the land. Zeke's gaze remained fixed on the children. 2 girls, maybe 5 years old, identical in their torn dresses and frightened eyes. They clutched each other like drowning swimmers, sharing the same piece of driftwood. You listening? The second man stepped forward. His boots crunched on the frost-covered ground. We ain't leaving empty-handed. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the scent of dying things. Zeke's ranch stretched out before him like a broken promise. Sarah's garden lay buried under weeds. The fence posts leaned at angles that spoke of surrender. He walked toward the gate. Each step felt like walking through water. The girls watched him approach. The one on the left had braided hair coming loose around her face. The other kept her sister's hand pressed tight in both of hers. Between them sat a carpet bag with a torn handle and a piece of paper weighted down with a stone. Zeke picked up the note. The writing was shaky, done in haste. Gone to California. Can't feed them no more. Names are Magnolia and Marigold. They good girls. The paper trembled in his hands. Not from the wind. What's this about? The banker had followed him to the gate. We got business to finish. Zeke looked down at the children. Magnolia, the one with the braided hair, met his eyes without flinching. Her sister buried her face against her shoulder. Mister, Magnolia's voice was barely a whisper. We ain't asking for much. The words hung in the cold air like smoke. Just somewhere to not be afraid, the banker laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. Can't even keep your own ranch and now you're collecting strays? Something shifted in Zeke's chest. A tightness he'd carried for 2 years, loosened just enough to let anger through. These are children. These are mouths to feed. The third man joined them at the gate. You can't feed yourself, Thornfield. Look at this place. Zeke did look. The broken boards on the barn, the empty chicken coop, the well that needed fixing. The house where he'd lived alone since Sarah died, where silence had become his only companion. Winter was coming. The mountains already wore caps of snow. In another month, the passes would close and the town would hunker down until spring. 30 days, the banker's voice cut through his thoughts. That's all you get. 30 days to pay what you owe, or we take everything. The men walked back to their horses. Their business was finished. Zeke knelt beside the gate. Up close, he could see the girls were thin. Their clothes hung loose on small frames. Marigold's shoes had holes that let in the cold. Where did she go? He asked. The woman who left you here. California, Magnolia said. She said there ain't no winter there. She said we'd be fine. Marigold's voice was smaller than her sister's. She said someone would take care of us. The wind picked up again. It carried the promise of snow. Zeke stood and opened the gate. The hinges screamed in protest. Everything on his ranch screamed these days. Come on then, the girls looked at each other. Some silent conversation passed between them. Then Magnolia picked up the carpet bag and helped her sister to her feet. They followed him toward the house. Their footsteps were quiet on the hard ground. Behind them, the gate swung shut with a sound like a closing door. The house felt different with voices in it. Even small ones. Zeke set water to boil on the stove while the girls sat at his kitchen table. They kept their hands folded, their eyes watchful. You hungry? They nodded. He had beans, some hardtack. Coffee that had seen better days. Not much for growing children, but it would have to do. As he cooked, he found himself watching them, the way they stayed close to each other, The way their eyes followed his every movement. The way they flinched when he opened a cabinet too quickly. "What happened to your mama?" he asked. "She died last winter." Magnolia's voice was steady. "The fever took her." "Daddy's been gone a long time," Miracl added. "Before Mama died even." Zeke served the beans in Sarah's good bowls. The girls ate without speaking, their spoons scraping against ceramic. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. When they finished, Magnolia looked up at him. "Thank you, Mr. Zeke," he said. "Name's Zeke. Thank you, Mr. Zeke." He showed them to Sarah's sewing room. There was a bed there, small but clean. He found extra blankets in the chest at the foot of his own bed. They smelled like lavender and memories. "Just for tonight," he told them, "until I figure out what to do." The girls climbed into the bed together. They fit like puzzle pieces, arms around each other, breathing in the same rhythm. Zeke closed the door and stood in his empty kitchen. The fire in the stove crackled. The clock on the mantel ticked away the seconds. 30 days to save his ranch. 2 children who needed more than he could give. Winter coming fast like a debt collector. He poured himself coffee and sat at the table where the girls had eaten. Their bowls still held the ghost of warmth. Outside, the wind whispered promises it couldn't keep. The girls woke before dawn. Zeke found them in the kitchen, standing by the window, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. "Mama used to say, morning was God's way of giving second chances," Magnolia whispered. Zeke poured coffee with hands that had forgotten how to be gentle around small things. The girls sat at his table, their feet dangling above the floor. In daylight, their resemblance was startling. Mirror images of each other, down to the way they tilted their heads when listening. "You got any seeds?" Magnolia asked. "Seeds?" "For planting. The ground's still warm enough if you know what to put in it." Zeke looked out at his barren fields. The earth lay cracked and stubborn, refusing his attempts at cultivation for 2 seasons running. "Nothing grows here anymore." Magnolia slipped from her chair and walked to the window. She pressed her palm against the glass, studying the land with eyes too old for her face. "Mama taught me about dirt. She said every patch of ground has a story. You just got to know how to read it." After breakfast, she led him outside. Her bare feet found the soft spots in the hard earth. She knelt and dug with her fingers, bringing up handfuls of soil. She smelled it, tasted it, let it run through her small hands. "Here," she said, pointing to a section near the house. "This spot remembers water. And there," she moved to another patch. "This one's been sleeping, not dead." Zeke had seed packets. In the barn, leftovers from Sarah's garden. Magnolia sorted through them with the concentration of a scholar reading ancient texts. She set aside the carrots, the beans, the hardy greens that could survive an early frost. "These ones," she said. "They'll grow." They worked through the morning. Magnolia's hands moved with certainty, placing seeds at depths that seemed random, but felt right. Marigold stayed close, carrying water from the well in a bucket too big for her arms. The sun climbed higher. Sweat beaded on Zeke's forehead as he broke ground with his hoe. The girls worked without complaint, their movements economical and sure. "How do you know all this?" he asked. "Mama grew up on a farm before she came west. She taught me everything she remembered." By midday, they had planted 3 rows. The earth looked different somehow, expectant. "Now we wait," Magnolia said, wiping her hands on her dress. That afternoon, Zeke hitched the wagon for the trip to town. The girls sat beside him on the bench, their clean faces shining in the sunlight. Copper Ridge spread before them in the valley, a collection of wooden buildings and dusty streets that had seen better days. The stairs started at the general store. Mrs. Abernathy behind the counter let her gaze linger on the girls, with the kind of interest that felt sharp. Other customers turned to look, their conversations dropping to whispers. "Zeke Thornfield." Mrs. Abernathy said. "Heard you had some visitors." "Need supplies," he replied, placing his list on the counter. Magnolia and Marigold stood close to his legs, their earlier confidence dimmed by the weight of watching eyes. A woman in a fine dress entered the store, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. Mrs. Cordelia Blackthorne, the banker's wife. The woman who decided which families belonged in Copper Ridge and which did not. "My word," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "These must be the children everyone's talking about." The girls pressed closer to Zeke. He felt their small hands grip his coat. "They're staying with me," he said. "Temporarily, I'm sure." Mrs. Blackthorne's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Until proper arrangements can be made." The words hung in the air like a threat. Zeke gathered his supplies and led the girls outside. The wagon seat felt smaller on the ride home, the silence heavier. That evening, the cattle gathered at the fence closest to the house. Zeke had noticed it yesterday, but dismissed it as coincidence. Now he watched the animals press against the rails, their eyes fixed on the girls. "They're scared," Marigold said softly. "Scared of what?" "Not of something, for something. They know winter's coming, and they don't think they'll make it." Zeke looked at his herd. 20 head of cattle, thin and struggling. His father had run 200 head on this land. The numbers had dwindled each year since Sarah's death, disease and drought claiming what his neglect had weakened. Marigold climbed the fence and sat on the top rail. The nearest cow approached, its brown eyes liquid with some ancient sadness. She reached out and touched its nose. "See?" she whispered. "We're all scared sometimes." The cow's breathing steadied. One by one, the others approached. Their agitation faded into something approaching peace. "How did you know?" Zeke asked. "Animals talk," Marigold said. "You just got to listen with more than your ears." The next morning brought Harrison Cromwell to the ranch. The banker arrived alone, his horse picking its way carefully across the rutted ground. Zeke met him in the yard, the girls watching from the porch. "Came to see how you're managing," Cromwell said, dismounting. "With your new responsibilities, managing fine." Cromwell's eyes swept the property. They lingered on the freshly planted garden, the calm cattle, the small faces peering from behind the porch posts. "Those children," he said. "They're going to need things, school, proper clothes, medicine when they get sick. I'll provide for them." "With what money?" Cromwell's voice wasn't unkind, but it cut deep. "You're already 3 months behind. Winter's coming, and you've got 2 more mouths to feed." Marigold stepped forward. Her sister tried to pull her back, but she shook free and walked to where the men stood. "Mister," she said to Cromwell, "you got sad eyes." The banker blinked. "What? Sad eyes? Like you don't want to be here saying mean things." Cromwell's face softened. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the banker's armor. "It's not mean, child. It's business. Business is just people deciding things. People can decide different." Zeke watched the exchange with growing amazement. The 5-year-old girl stood facing the man who held the deed to the ranch, her small frame radiating a confidence that seemed impossible. "What if I could pay?" Zeke heard himself say. "What if I could catch up on what I owe?" "That's a mighty big what if," Cromwell replied. But his voice had lost its edge. "How long would you give me?" Cromwell looked at Marigold, then at the planted garden, then at the peaceful cattle. End of harvest season. "That's 2 months. You bring me what you owe, we'll talk about terms for the rest." After he left, Zeke stood in his yard surrounded by the impossible. 2 children who saw things others missed. Ground that might actually grow food. Cattle that had found their calm. "Think we can do it?" Magnolia asked. Zeke looked at the girls, at his land, at the mountains that held tomorrow's weather in their peaks. For the first time in 2 years, The word that came to him wasn't no. Think we might. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of hope. In the distance, the first green shoots pushed through the earth they had planted together. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked beneath other mail in the girl's carpet bag. Zeke found it while searching for clean clothes to mend. The paper was yellowed, official, bearing the seal of the territorial prison. His hands trembled as he read. The words blurred together, then sharpened into focus. Tobias Washington, release date pending. Good behavior. The girls were in the garden, tending the green shoots that had pushed through the earth with startling determination. Their laughter carried on the morning breeze, innocent and bright. Zeke folded the letter and slipped it into his coat pocket. The weight of it pressed against his chest with every breath. Papa Zeke, Magnolia called from the garden. The name had appeared gradually, settling into their daily rhythm without ceremony. Come see how tall the carrots are getting. He walked to where they knelt in the dirt, their hands dark with soil. The plants had grown overnight, it seemed. Green leaves reaching toward the sun with impossible enthusiasm. They're growing fast, he said. Everything grows fast when it's got good reason to, Miracl replied, patting the earth around a young bean plant. That afternoon, a horse approached from the east. Zeke recognized the rider before he could make out the face. Marcus Thornfield sat his mount with the rigid posture of a man who'd found success in civilized places and wore it like armor. Brother, Marcus said, dismounting near the porch. His boots were polished, his coat free of dust despite the long ride from the train. Station. Marcus. The brothers stood facing each other across years of different choices. Marcus had left for Chicago after their father's death, built a business in manufactured goods. Zeke had stayed with the land, married Sarah, buried dreams in the same soil that now refused to yield. Got your letter, Marcus said. About the children. Didn't send you any letter. Mrs. Blackthorne sent it. Said you'd taken leave of your senses. The girls had stopped their gardening. They stood between the rows of vegetables, their faces watchful. I'm managing fine. Fine? Marcus gestured at the ranch, the worn buildings, the modest herd. This place is falling apart. Zeke, you're falling apart. Was falling apart. Things change. Marcus walked to the garden fence. He studied the neat rows, the healthy plants, the two small figures who had accomplished what Zeke's efforts alone could not. They're not your children, he said quietly. They're mine now. You can't save everyone. You couldn't save Sarah. The words hit like physical blows. Zeke's hands clenched at his sides, the old pain rising in his throat. That's different. Is it? You're clinging to these girls because you think it'll fill the hole she left. But it won't. Nothing will. Magnolia stepped forward. Her small hand found Zeke's, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. We're not trying to fill anything, she said to Marcus. We're just trying to grow something new. That evening, after Marcus had ridden back to town, Zeke sat with the girls on the porch. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of ending. Is he right? Miracl asked. About us not being your real children? Zeke looked at their faces, serious and questioning in the fading light. What makes children real? Blood, Magnolia said. That's what the lady in town said. Blood makes family. Blood's just one way. There are others. What other ways? Zeke thought of Sarah, of the child they'd lost before it could draw breath, of the empty rooms and silent meals, of the way these girls had filled spaces he hadn't known were hollow. Choice, he said. Choice makes family too. The next morning brought visitors. The Herrera family arrived in a wagon loaded with tools and supplies. Miguel Herrera had been their neighbor for 5 years, a quiet man who worked his smaller spread with the dedication of someone who understood the cost of failure. Heard you might need help with harvest, Miguel said, his English careful but clear. don't have money to pay workers. Who said anything about pay? Maria Herrera climbed down from the wagon, her arms full of fresh bread and preserves. Their 3 children followed, shy but curious about the girls who had become the subject of so much talk. We help each other, Maria said. That's how it works out here. The day passed in shared labor. The men worked on fence repairs while the women tended the expanded garden. The children played between the rows, their laughter mixing with the sound of hammers and the distant lowing of cattle. As the sun began to set, Mrs. Blackthorne arrived. She sat in her carriage at the edge of the property, her presence sharp against the easy camaraderie of the working families. Zeke Thornfield. She called, "I need to speak with you." He walked to her carriage, aware of the sudden stillness behind him. The laughter had stopped. Even the children sensed the shift in the air. "This has gone far enough," she said. "Those children need proper care, a real home. They have a home. They have a temporary shelter with a man who can barely care for himself." She withdrew a document from her handbag. Official paper, stamped and sealed. "I've petitioned Judge Morrison. He'll be here next week to review the situation." What situation? The situation of 2 children living in unsuitable conditions with an unfit guardian. Zeke took the paper. The words swam before his eyes, legal language that spelled out his inadequacies in precise, damning detail. "You can't do this." "I can and I have." Those children deserve better than this backwater ranch with a man who drinks his sorrows and plants his hope in barren ground. After she left, Zeke stood in his yard holding the petition. The Herrera family approached slowly, their faces grave. With understanding. "What will you do?" Miguel asked. "Fight." "How?" Zeke looked at the thriving garden, the calm cattle, the house that had found its voice again. "I don't know yet." That night, he sat with the girls in their room. They were quiet, sensing the weight of adult worries without understanding their shape. "Are we in trouble?" Marigold asked. "No, I am. Because of us. Because of people who think they know better than we do what family should look like." Magnolia reached under her pillow and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside were letters, carefully folded and tied with string. "We've been keeping these," she said. "Didn't know. If we should tell you." Zeke unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was careful, educated. The address was the territorial prison. "My dear daughters," it began. "I think of you every day." His hand stilled. The truth settled in his chest like a stone. "Your daddy's coming home," Magnolia whispered. "We know," Marigold added. "The stepmother told us before she left. Said he'd want us back." "Is that what you want?" The girls looked at each other, that silent communication passing between them again. "We want what's best," Magnolia said. "But we don't know what that is anymore." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of growing things and distant storms. The truth was coming whether they were ready or not. "We'll figure it out," Zeke said. "Together." But even as he spoke the words, he felt the foundation of their small world shifting beneath them. The letter in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest, a promise and a threat wrapped in official paper. The girls curled up together in their bed, their breathing eventually settling into the rhythm of sleep. Zeke sat in the darkness, listening to the house creak around them, holding vigil against the uncertain dawn. The telegram arrived on a Wednesday morning, carried by a boy on a sweating horse. 3 weeks. That's how long they had before Tobias. Washington walked free from the territorial prison. Zeke folded the yellow paper and slipped it into his shirt pocket next to the custody petition. The weight of both documents pressed against his ribs with every breath. "Bad news?" Magnolia asked from the kitchen doorway. "Just business." But she saw through him the way children see through adults who think silence protects them. Her eyes held the same wary knowledge that had kept her and her sister alive on the streets before the stepmother abandoned them. The ranch had transformed in the weeks since their arrival. The garden sprawled in neat rows, heavy with vegetables that defied the drought. The cattle had filled out, their coats glossy with health. Even the buildings seemed to stand straighter, as if the presence of hope had reinforced their foundations. Zeke threw himself into teaching the girls everything he could. How to read the weather in the color of distant clouds. How to tell when a cow was sick before it showed symptoms. How to preserve food for winter and manage the books that tracked their modest prosperity. "Why are you teaching us this?" Marigold asked as he showed her how to clean and oil the rifle. "Every person should know how to take care of themselves. But we got you to take care of us." The words hit him like a physical blow. He set down the rifle and knelt beside her, his hands gentle on her small shoulders. "I'm trying to make sure. You can take care of yourselves if you need to. Are you going somewhere?" "No, but sometimes life takes people places they don't plan to go." That evening, he sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, the first he'd touched since the girls arrived. The amber liquid caught the firelight, promising the same numbness that had carried him through the months after Sarah's death. "Papa Zeke?" Magnolia's voice was soft in the darkness. "You all right?" He looked at her standing in the doorway, her nightgown white against the shadows. Behind her, Marigold peered out with sleepy eyes. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." He set the bottle down without drinking. "Sometimes being fine takes work." The girls padded onto the porch in their bare feet. They settled on either side of him, their small bodies warm against his arms. "Mama used to say sadness was like a storm," Magnolia said. "You got to let it blow through, but you don't got to let it blow you down. What if the storm's too big? Then you find something to hold on to until it passes." Marigold's hand found his, her fingers small and trusting. "We'll hold on to you if you hold on to us." The next morning brought Marcus back to the ranch. This time he wasn't alone. Mrs. Blackthorne sat beside him in the wagon, her presence sharp and disapproving. "We need to talk," Marcus said, climbing down from the driver's seat. "About what? About what's best for those children." Mrs. Blackthorne remained in the wagon, her back straight as a fence post. "I've arranged for them to go to the Mercy home in Denver. It's a good place. They'll get proper schooling. They're getting schooling here." "From who? You?" Marcus's voice carried the weight of older brother authority. "When's the last time you opened a book, Zeke? When's the last time you were sober 2 days running?" The accusation hung in the air between them. Zeke felt the girls watching from the house, their faces pressed against the kitchen window. "I'm sober now. For how long? What happens when the loneliness gets too heavy again? What happens when winter comes and you're trapped in that house with memories that won't leave you alone?" "I'll manage." "You'll drink. You'll neglect them. You'll break their hearts the way you broke Sarah's." The words hit like a physical blow. Zeke's hands clenched at his sides, the old rage rising in his throat. "Sarah died of fever, not heartbreak. She died because you were too drunk to ride for the doctor when she first got sick. She died because you thought whiskey was more important than medicine." The truth landed like a fist to the chest. Zeke staggered backward, his legs suddenly weak. "That's not true, isn't it? You remember how she looked at you those last days? The disappointment in her eyes?" But even as Marcus spoke, Zeke saw something else in his memory. Sarah's face, pale with fever, but her eyes holding love instead of accusation. Her hand reaching for his, squeezing with what strength she had left. "She forgave me," he said quietly. "Maybe, but can you forgive yourself?" The question hung between them, unanswered and heavy. Mrs. Blackthorne climbed down from the wagon, her movements precise and determined. "This conversation is pointless," she said. "I have the legal authority to remove these children from an unfit home. The wagon to Denver leaves tomorrow. You can't do this." I can and I will. Unless you want to fight me in court with what money. You're 3 months behind on your mortgage and winter's coming. After they left, Zeke sat on his porch steps with his head in his hands. The girls emerged from the house, their faces grave, with understanding beyond their years. We heard, Magnolia said. I'm sorry. For what? For not being good enough. For not being able to keep you safe. Marigold sat beside him on the step. Mama used to say people ain't good or bad. They're just people trying to do their best with what they got. What if my best isn't enough? Then you do better. The simplicity of it cut through him like clean water. He looked at the girls, at the thriving ranch, at the life they'd built together from nothing but hope and stubborn determination. I need to tell you something, he said, about your father. He showed them the telegram, watched their faces as they absorbed the news. 3 weeks, the words sat between them like a challenge. What do you want me to do? He asked. Fight, Magnolia said without hesitation. Even if it means losing? Especially then. That night, Zeke sat at his kitchen table with paper and pen. The letter took him 3 attempts to write, his hand shaking with the weight of words he'd never expected to say. Dear Judge Morrison, he began, I am writing to contest the petition for removal of 2 children in my care. He wrote about the garden that had saved his ranch, about cattle that had found their peace, about 2 girls who had taught him the difference between existing and living. He wrote about Sarah, about the guilt he'd carried and the forgiveness he'd finally learned to accept, about the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. When he finished, the sun was rising over the mountains. The girls were already in the kitchen, making breakfast with the confidence of children who belonged somewhere. Ready for today? Magnolia asked. Zeke folded the letter and slipped it into his coat pocket. For the first time in months, the weight there felt lighter instead of heavier. Ready, he said. Outside, the cattle were stirring in the pre-dawn light. The garden stretched green and prosperous in the morning shadows. The ranch stood solid and welcoming, no longer a place of ending but a place of beginning. 3 weeks. The storm was coming whether they were ready or not, but they would face it together. The man who walked up the dusty path to Zeke's ranch bore little resemblance to the monster the stepmother had described. Tobias Washington moved with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to carry himself with purpose. His clothes were clean but worn, his hands calloused from honest work even behind prison walls. Zeke met him at the gate, his own hands steady despite the tremor in his chest. The girls watched from the porch, their faces unreadable in the morning light. You Thornfield? Tobias asked. I am. Come to see my daughters. The words hung between them, simple and loaded with years of absence. Zeke studied the man's face, searching for signs of the desperation that had driven him to theft, the weakness that had left his children vulnerable. They're scared, Zeke said. Of me? Of being left again. Tobias's shoulders sagged slightly. I never wanted to leave them in the first place. But you did. I did. The admission sat heavy in the dust between them. Tobias looked past Zeke to the porch where his daughter stood frozen between hope and fear. My wife was dying, he said quietly. Medicine cost more than I could make in a year of honest work. So I stopped being honest. Was it worth it? No, she died anyway, and I lost everything else that mattered. Zeke opened the gate. The hinges, oiled and repaired, swung silent and smooth. Come on then. They walked toward the house together. 2 men carrying the weight of their failures in different ways. The girls stepped down from the porch, their movements cautious but deliberate. Magnolia, Tobias said, his voice breaking on the name. Marigold. Papa, Magnolia whispered. The word hung in the air like a prayer. Tobias knelt in the dust, his arms open, but not reaching. Waiting, the girls approached slowly, their steps measured and careful. When they finally reached him, the embrace was gentle, tentative, the reunion of strangers who shared blood, but not memory. "You've grown," Tobias said, his hands touching their faces with wonder. "We were 5 when you left," Marigold said. "We're still 5. "No, you're older in ways that matter." Zeke watched from the porch as the man tried to rebuild a bridge that had been burned by necessity and hardship. The conversation was awkward, full of gaps that 3 years of absence had carved between them. "The stepmother," Tobias said eventually. "Where is she?" "Gone to California," Magnolia replied. "Said she couldn't feed us anymore. She was supposed to take care of you. She tried. But trying ain't the same as doing." The wisdom in the child's voice cut through Tobias like a blade. He looked at his daughters, really looked at them, and saw what Zeke had discovered. These were not the same frightened children he'd left behind. They had been tempered by abandonment and refined by love. "You've been good to them," he said to Zeke. "They've been good to me." That afternoon, Mrs. Blackthorne arrived with Marcus and 2 men from town. Her carriage cut through the dust with the authority of someone accustomed to having her way. "I see we have a complication," she said, stepping down from the carriage with practiced grace. "No complication," Tobias said. "Just a father come to collect his children. A father who's been in prison. A father who's paid his debt." Mrs. Blackthorne's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Paid to whom? Your children have been living with a drunk and a failure. Now you want to add a criminal to the mix? I'm not a criminal anymore. Once a thief, always a thief. These children need stability. They need a proper home." "They have a proper home," Zeke said. "With whom? You or him?" Mrs. Blackthorne's voice carried the weight of someone who had found the perfect weapon. "You can't both have them. And neither of you is fit to raise children alone." The words hit like stones thrown into still water. Ripples of doubt spread through the gathered crowd. The 2 men who had accompanied Mrs. Blackthorne stepped forward, their hands resting on the handles of their guns. "Step away from the children," one of them said. "No," Magnolia said. The word came out clear and strong. "No, we won't. Child, you don't understand what's best for you. I understand plenty. I understand that lady wants to send us away from the only home we got. I understand that man wants to break up the only family we got. And I understand that sometimes grown folks are too busy being right to see what's true." Mrs. Blackthorne's face flushed red. "You will not speak to me in that tone." "I'll speak in whatever tone I need to. You want to take us from Papa Zeke because he used to drink too much. You want to take us from our real Papa because he made a mistake. But you don't want to take us because you care about us. You want to take us because you think we don't belong." The silence that followed was heavy with truth. Mrs. Blackthorne's mouth opened and closed without sound. Even her armed companions seemed uncertain. "The judge will decide," she said finally. "Yes," Tobias said. "He will." That evening, Zeke and Tobias sat on the porch while the girls played in the yard. The conversation between them was careful, 2 men circling around. The thing they both wanted, but couldn't both have. "They love you," Tobias said. "They love you too. They just don't remember how yet. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe they're better off forgetting I ever existed. Maybe, but that's not your choice to make." Tobias was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know. If I take them, will you fight me?" Zeke looked at the girls, at their faces bright with laughter in the fading light. "If you take them, will you love them the way they deserve?" "I'll try. Trying ain't enough. Not for them. Not anymore." "Then what is?" "Being the man they need you to be. Not the man you were. Not the man you think you should be. The man they need." The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of ending and beginning. Tomorrow would bring the judge, the decision, the reckoning that would determine their future. But tonight, 2 men who had both failed in different ways sat together while 2 little girls played in the dust. their laughter carrying on the wind like a promise that some things could be redeemed. "What if we're both wrong?" Tobias asked. "About what?" "About what's best for them." Zeke considered this. "Then we ask them. And we listen to what they say." In the yard, Magnolia and Marigold chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. Their voices rose and fell with the rhythm of children who had learned to find joy in small things. They would face tomorrow together, all of them. And whatever came after, they would face as family. However, that family was finally defined. Judge Morrison arrived at noon, his black robes dusty from the long ride. The entire town seemed to have gathered at the ranch, faces lined with curiosity and judgment. Wagons crowded the yard. Voices murmured in the shadows of the barn. The judge set up his makeshift court on the porch, his wooden gavel dark against the weathered boards. Mrs. Blackthorne sat in the front row of gathered townsfolk, her spine straight as a fence post. Marcus stood beside her, his city clothes marking him as an outsider who thought he understood. "This hearing will determine the custody of Magnolia and Marigold Washington," Judge Morrison announced. "Both their biological father and current guardian have petitioned for custody." The girls sat on the porch steps, their hands folded in their laps. Their faces were calm, but Zeke could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they leaned toward each other for strength. Mrs. Blackthorne stood first. "Your Honor, I represent the interests of these children and this community. Neither man before you is fit to raise them." "On what grounds?" "Mr. Thornfield is a known drunk who has let his ranch fall into ruin. Mr. Washington is a convicted thief fresh from prison. These children deserve better than either man can provide." Harrison Cromwell rose from the crowd. "Your Honor, if I may, I've known Zeke Thornfield for 15 years. He's had his troubles, but he's turned his life around. His ranch is thriving. Now his debts are current." "Because of those children," Mrs. Blackthorne snapped. "What happens when the novelty wears off? When winter comes and he's alone with his grief again?" Miguel Herrera stepped forward. "Your Honor, my family has watched these children grow these past months. They are happy. They are healthy. They are loved." "By whom?" Mrs. Blackthorne's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "A drunk or a criminal?" "By both," Maria Herrera said quietly. "Love is not diminished by being shared." Judge Morrison's gaze moved between the two men. "Mr. Washington, you've been silent. What do you have to say?" Tobias stood slowly. "Your Honor, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I stole medicine for my dying wife, and when she died anyway, I lost everything, my freedom, my hope. And now I'm asking for a chance to earn back what I lost. Not my wife. She's gone, but maybe my daughters, maybe my hope. What can you offer them? Love, work, a chance to know their father is more than a memory and a mistake." Judge Morrison turned to Zeke. "Mr. Thornfield, these children have been in your care for months. What do you want?" "I want what's best for them, which is—" Zeke looked at the girls, at their faces turned toward him with trust and love. "I want them to have choices. I want them to never be afraid again. I want them to know they're wanted. By you. By anyone who's lucky enough to have them." The judge was quiet for a long moment. Children approached the bench. Magnolia and Marigold stood together, their hands clasped. They walked to where the judge sat, their steps measured and sure. "Do you understand what's happening here?" Judge Morrison asked. "Yes, sir," Magnolia said. "You're deciding who gets to keep us. Who would you like to live with?" The girls looked at each other, that silent conversation passing between them. Then Magnolia spoke, her voice clear and strong. "We'd like to live with our family." "Which family?" "All of it. Papa Zeke takes care of us. Our real Papa loves us." "Why can't we have both?" Mrs. Blackthorne stood. "That's not how custody works, child. You can't have two fathers. Why not? Marigold asked. Some kids don't have any fathers. Some kids have one. Why can't we have two? The simplicity of the question cut through the legal complexities. Judge Morrison leaned forward, his eyes studying the girls with new interest. What are you proposing? Papa Zeke knows about ranching, Magnolia said. Our real Papa knows about other things. The ranch is big enough for everybody. We could all live here together. Like a family, Marigold added. You are already a family, Tobias said quietly. I'm just asking to be part of it. Judge Morrison looked at the thriving ranch, the healthy cattle, the garden that spoke of care and knowledge. He looked at the two men who had found common ground in their love for the same children. This is highly irregular, he said. So is abandoning children at a gate, Zeke replied. So is love growing where it wasn't planted. Your Honor, Mrs. Blackthorne said, this is ridiculous. These children need structure, discipline, proper education. They need love, Maria Herrera called from the crowd. Look at them. They're thriving. Judge Morrison stood. The crowd fell silent, waiting for his decision. I'm awarding joint custody, he announced. Mr. Thornfield will remain legal guardian. Given his established relationship with the children and his successful rehabilitation of this property, Mr. Washington will be granted parental rights and residence, conditional on his continued good conduct. Mrs. Blackthorne's face flushed red. This is unprecedented. So is most everything worth doing, the judge replied. These children have created something here. A family built on choice rather than blood, on love rather than law. I'm not going to destroy that. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some approving, some skeptical. But the girls were already running to both men, their arms wrapping around legs and waists, their faces bright with the joy of belonging. That evening, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Tobias helped with the milking while Zeke repaired fence posts. The girls moved between both men, their laughter carrying on the wind. Think this will work? Tobias asked as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. Don't know. But it's worth trying. What if I disappoint them again? Then, you'll make it right. That's what family does. The girls came running from the garden, their hands full of carrots and beans. Their faces were dirty with honest soil, their eyes bright with the security of being wanted. Look what we grew, Magnolia said, holding up a carrot the size of her forearm. We grew it together, Marigold added. All of us. Zeke looked at the vegetables, at the girls, at the man who had traveled so far to find his way home. The ranch stretched around them, no longer a place of endings, but a place of beginnings. Yes, he said. We did. The stars came out one by one, puncturing the darkening sky. The cattle settled in the pasture. The house glowed with the warm light of family. Mrs. Blackthorne's carriage disappeared down the dusty road, carrying her disapproval back to town. But the ranch remained, solid and welcoming, a testament to the truth that families could be built, as well as born. Two men who had both failed in different ways, two girls who had been abandoned, but not broken. One ranch that had learned to grow more than crops. The everyday miracle had revealed itself at last. Not in supernatural gifts or mystical knowledge, but in the simple truth that love multiplied when shared, that broken things could be mended, that hope could grow in the most unlikely soil. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.